Alrighty guys, welcome back to another little video where today we're going to be taking a look at and talking about the N1 Esports case from DIY-PC. Let's get into it, shall we? And now that the obligatory peel is out of the way, let's get into it. Okay, so this is the DIY N1 Esports. Now, this case sits at a very, to put it bluntly, very low price point of 45 USD. Now, for 45 USD, you're pretty much looking at a box that you just hope is not going to suffocate your computer parts. You never have really been able to buy a very good looking case or a very good looking case with good airflow for around that $45 to $50 price point. Yes, there's been a few cases over the years, but none of which that have been as full featured as this one. Now, let me make one thing perfectly clear. This build is not sponsored. This computer case was not given to me. I purchased this because I loved the way that it looked. And that is one of the first things I wanted to talk about. It's aesthetics. Aesthetically, it is very pleasing. It has a tempered glass side panel that's a relatively thick tempered glass for the price of the case. It has good airflow up front, and it's not atrociously ugly. It might not be the best looking case in the world, but in the aesthetic portion, it's really not bad. Now, let me move on to the next point. Its size. This case wastes absolutely no space. And when I say absolutely no space, I mean there is maybe a couple of millimeters between the end of the GTX 780 MSI Lightning card and the front case fans. Now, this is one more piece that I should probably add. This case only comes with a singular exhaust fan, and I will get into that a little bit deeper later. But when it comes to having a rather small form factor case for a full ATX build, this case is amazing. It is so much smaller than what I had initially given it credit for. Comparing the N1 Esports to my BitPhoenix Nova Mesh and my Rosewoe Prism, it's shorter, slimmer, and not as tall as either of the other two cases. But now that we've talked about the form factor, let's talk about airflow. As it comes from the factory, the case only has one rear exhaust fan, which kind of leaves a little bit to be desired, especially if you're going to be putting hotter components inside of this case. But not as all doom and gloom, because the top and front of this case are mesh. So by simply adding in some additional fans that you can either buy something like some RGB fans or some just cheap, more basic fans, you can increase the airflow of this case by an exponential amount. When I was doing my thermal testing on this case, my GTX 780 went from 68 degrees Celsius all the way down to 61 degrees Celsius just by adding in two front air intake fans. And CPU dropped a full 3 degrees Celsius from 54 degrees Celsius to 51 degrees Celsius. And the components that I had inside the case when doing thermal testing was relatively warm, being a X5670, which was overclocked to 3.6 GHz, and my GTX 780 Lightning, also overclocked. But speaking of fans, how many fans can you actually fit inside this case? Well, you can fit 3 fans up front, 2 fans up top, 1 fan at the bottom, or 1 fan at the rear, and 2 fans at the bottom if you fancy having fans that, well, are essentially blowing nothing. So you can have let's just be real here and say you can have a maximum of 6 fans. Now, you cannot mount fans up front, like outside of the case, like where the front panel would meet the actual front of the case. There's not enough room for that. The fans have to be mounted on the inside of the case. But speaking about mounting stuff, it is said on their website, or it is said on Newegg, that you could mount up to two 240mm radiators in this case. Now, I'm sure by the thumbnail, you guys know that I did something like that. But we'll come to that a little bit later. Now, when it comes to hardware that you can actually fit inside of this case, you can fit standard ATX size motherboards. Unfortunately, eATX size motherboards don't exactly fit. With a little bit of bending some little tabs out of the way, you can make an eATX motherboard fit, but you're very limiting the amount of space that you have. And now for graphics cards. The graphics card that I actually used for this testing was one of my bigger ones. I don't know if it's my biggest one, but I know it's definitely one of my bigger ones, being my GTX 780 MSI Lightning card. That card only had a few millimeters between the front air intake fan and the back of the shroud. So this case does not accommodate for massive graphics cards very well, but with the $45 price point, I highly doubt most people are going to be trying to put in something like an RTX 3090. But I digress. Now, when it comes to actual power supply sizes, you can fit extremely large power supplies in here, being the fact there really is not a solid drive cage underneath the power supply shroud. One of the problems that many other cases of this form factor have is that you don't have enough room for larger power supplies, simply based upon the fact that they put these drive cages in there that block off most of your cable management options. Even not really attempting to cable manage, I was able to fit in my 850 watt, 80 plus gold rated ProMiner Butterfly power supply in there, which is not a small unit by any means. For the rest of my testing, I used a smaller, much more mainstream size power supply of the Rosewell ARC650. Now, that power supply fit with absolutely no issue, and even while having very lackluster cable management, I was able to get the side panel on one-handed. So, now the burning question that I know a couple people are going to be asking. Well, Cross, could you build a water-cooled system in this? Why, yes. Yes, you can. Now, don't judge me too much for the runs that you're going to see. This was literally what I had on hand for building a water-cooled system. And I'm not going to lie, I really want to go back and fix a lot of these runs. Because, like, if I just had some actual 90-degree fittings instead of, like, having half black and half chrome, I could have made this build look so much nicer. But I think that'll be a topic for another video. But, yes. This case, you're able to fit two 240mm radiators in here. But please note that the orientation that you see my radiators in, where the top radiator has the actual G1/4 fittings at the rear of the case, is the only way that I was able to get that radiator to fit. And it was the same way with the radiator up front, where it has to have the G1/4 fittings at the bottom. So if that's something that bothers you, you should not be looking at this case for water cooling. By the way, you guys, this is a $45 case. The two radiators in here combined cost as much as what this case does. So, I highly doubt most people are going to be looking at this case for a full custom water loop build. But if that tickles your fancy, yes, you certainly can pull it off. And now we're going to come to the build quality of the case. The build quality of the case is slightly lackluster. But with its feature set and the just amazing building experience that was inside of this case, I really can't complain about the quality. The front panel is very hard to pull off, and the actual mounting holes for where you screw in either your fans or your radiator up to the front of the case, they dent very easily, so if you screw too tightly, you will end up denting those little nubbins, or those little, whatever you want to call them, the little spots where you would screw your screws into. But with that being said, that was really my only complaint about this case. When it came to when it came to actually building in this case, building this water-cooled system was far easier than building something in like the BitPhoenix Nova Mesh, which I absolutely adore that case, but the problem is that is not a very friendly case to build in. If you have some experience and you know what you're doing, you can do it. But like trying to run the 8-pin EPS connector after the motherboard is mounted or after your cooler is mounted, it is not easy. But in this case, it actually is. And it's even easier if you remove the rear exhaust fan temporarily and then plug in your EPS connector. You'll have no issues getting that through even after everything is already mounted, which has just been an amazing thing, being the fact this case is only $45 and has given me one of the better building experiences that I've ever had building inside of a case. Not to mention the fact that the layout makes it very easy to cable managing to keep things looking clean. Even a very messy looking water-cooled build actually doesn't look out of place in this case, and with its small form factor, it's very interesting. So, let me guys know what you think down in the comment section below about what you think about the N1 Esports and whether or not this case is actually worth the money. Personally, I definitely think it is, but granted, I'm not exactly hard to please. So, with that being said, I'll see you guys later. Everybody have a good rest of your day. Peace out.